Welcome to the Lit Mom Podcast, your go-to source for bite-sized literacy tips and tricks. Join me as we explore evidence-based strategies, techniques, and resources that promote strong reading and writing skill development. Get ready to empower your family with the knowledge and tools to navigate the world of structured literacy and unlock limitless potential. Welcome, everyone, to the 10th episode of the Lit Mom Podcast, the podcast where we have been going on a learning journey and covering different areas of literacy in different ways that you can support your child in developing their literacy skills at home. I'm your host, Deb, and for today's episode, we are going to talk about comprehension. Comprehension is one of the 6 pillars of literacy instruction that is often talked about when we look at the science of reading and key components when we talk about what do we embed in our structured literacy programs. So comprehension is kind of that final piece or pillar that we are going to focus on, and it aligns nicely with all of the other areas we have talked about in this season of the Lit Mom Podcast. Before beginning our podcast, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territory in which I reside on. I reside on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which includes the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. I think it is important to take this time to give a land acknowledgement before we begin the podcast, because it is something that we never gave attention to or learned about in school when I was growing up. If we were to talk about Indigenous peoples and nations, we never really talked about it in the present or current situations that we live in. We kind of put it into history. One thing that I encourage you to do is to check out the calls to action. If you haven't done so, there are 94 calls to action. There are ones that are specific to education, so you can look those up. I will link one into the show notes as well, which is a very concise and nice way to start your learning journey if you haven't explored those calls to action yet. As always, I'd like to take this opportunity to continue my own learning and sharing alongside you as part of the LIT team. So please check out the show notes and review the calls to action and consider which ways we can continue to extend our learning each day with our children and for ourselves as well. Before we dive into comprehension for today's episode, I want to quickly touch on the 6 pillars of reading instruction. These pillars form the foundation for effective reading instruction and skill development for our kiddos. They include oral language, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. So if you've listened to previous episodes, you might notice that many of those episodes have already touched on the other pillars of reading instruction. So today we want to loop in comprehension. It is a crucial piece. It is the reason why we engage in the reading practices, where we want to be able to pull and derive meaning from text that we are reading. It is a really complex system of skills that need to go together so that we're able to comprehend what we're reading. And it's not something that we start out being able to do right away. And we also have to consider that in the beginning, our kiddos might be doing more listening comprehension versus reading comprehension. So that's something that we want to talk about. So what exactly is comprehension? At the core, comprehension is more than just decoding words on a page. It's about making sense of the text, understanding the author's message, being able to connect the dots between different ideas. So we can think of it as the ultimate goal of reading. We want for children to not only decode what is on the page in front of them, but we want for them to really grasp and understand what the text is telling them. Comprehension isn't a standalone skill. It is a skill that is intertwined with the other key pillars of reading instruction. As a child develops a strong understanding of phonemic awareness, general phonics principles, and develops their vocabulary, as well as has an opportunity to build their fluency skills, they're going to be able to then put those all into practice together to be able to comprehend what they are reading on the page in front of them. One way to look at the pillars of reading is that if we are going to build a house, we need to have a strong foundation and how all of the walls and the supports are going to allow for the house to stand on its own. and be able to then eventually put on the roof on the house. But we don't put the roof on the house before we have a foundation. So the 6 pillars of reading instruction can be considered that foundation and all of the supports that we want to put in place to ensure that we are successful when we talk about reading and comprehending what we read or our children are working towards reading. So while comprehension is a crucial skill that we want for our children to develop, many children have challenges in this area. Whether they have challenges with decoding, they have a limited vocabulary, they also may have difficulty with making inferences or predictions and summarizing what they have read about. These are all hurdles that are going to impede or can cause additional challenges for children when they're trying to comprehend, when they're working on learning from a reading that they're doing. So it's really important that we work on different strategies and tie in strategies that are effective when reading to help support their understanding of texts and passages. So let's now shift our focus to some practical ways that you can support your child in developing their comprehension skills at home. Families play a key role in supporting children in developing their comprehension skills at home. There are many different activities that you can be doing that are going to support the direct and explicit instruction that can be happening in the classroom as your child is working to develop their comprehension skills for reading. One thing that comes up often is using read alouds for listening comprehension. Listening comprehension means that children are going to be listening to a story, whether you're reading it or a sibling or another family member is reading it. They might also listen to an audiobook too. So if you have access to audiobooks, this is another really great way that they're going to practice those beginning stages of comprehension, because they have to listen to a story and then maybe tell you about the story. You can ask them to summarize what happened in the story, to retell the story, what was the main idea, as well as discuss different pieces such as who were the characters in the story, where did the story take place. All of those pieces are going to allow for them to begin to explore and pull in key information that they heard. And these are skills that then eventually, as they're able to decode, they have a bigger vocabulary, they have an understanding of how to read fluently, they're going to be able to then use those skills in their own reading. Another great option when we talk about comprehension is to engage in storytelling and have them retell a story. So after you have read something, have them retell it, have them reenact it using their stuffies or toys. What key points of the story did they really enjoy? What did they not really enjoy? But have questions that are open-ended so that they can express themselves in their thinking, but have it linked back to a read aloud or a story that you have read together to start to make those comprehension skills being put into practice. Something that you can do to support your child in developing their comprehension skills is have them create diagrams or pictures that align with a story that they have read to you or you have read with them. If they have read the story to you, you might have them talk about what happened in the story first and retell it, and then you could ask them to draw a picture or write about what happened in the story that they really liked, that they didn't like, talk about the characters, just getting for them to really have to think about and make connections to something that they have read to you or with you. So again, we're just getting the opportunity in to practice these skills in snapshot and bite-sized ways so that they're having extra time to begin to put comprehension into practice. Vocabulary games are another great way to support your child in their comprehension skill development. If a child has a broader or bigger vocabulary, they are less likely to have to spend time thinking about what does this word mean and make sense of it in different sentences or contexts. Because they already have an understanding of a word, they're actually going to be able to pull the sentences together and make meaning of them a lot easier than if they're not sure what a bunch of words mean. We want for them to be able to fluidly read through different passages and text, starting with words and sentences, but you want for them to have an easier time and have to focus on what is the author trying to tell me? What are these facts telling me versus I don't really understand what this one word means and have it completely derail their thought process. A great strategy is to have your child work on making predictions. So what is the outcome of something going to be? If you've read a certain part of a story, what do they think is going to happen next? And then check back in and say, okay, is our prediction right or wrong? It's not so much that we're worried about them getting it right, but we want for them to accurately begin to put these skills in place and understand what it means to make a prediction, and then also make those inferences about what do we think could be happening or what do we think the author is trying to tell us, and go into it on a deeper level. Another strategy, especially for our little youngest learners, is to bring in activities where they have to talk about sequencing. So, how do I get dressed in the winter knowing that that's coming up? What is the sequence that I need to work through? And having to plan and think ahead past the first step. Having them do this in everyday life is going to make it easier when we talk about putting together a sequence in our stories and what we're reading, beginning, middle, and end, because they've already had to work through going past just the very first event or step that they're considering. So make it fun. What do we need to do to get ready for bed? What do we need to do in the morning? If we are going to go out and do a certain activity, what are the things that we might need to do to get ready for that? How do you play hockey? How do we skate? Those kind of things. Just make it fun, but make it meaningful to your everyday life. Another thing that you can do is have those conversations that are going to compare and contrast different stories, whether you look at the same author, and I will link this into my book recommendation today. But what do you notice about the stories written by the same author? Are there different settings? What do you notice about the characters, even characters within stories, talking about similarities and differences that they might notice? Again, they're having to really attend to what they have read or you have read to them and have those discussions with you. As always, it's important to remember to keep our activities age appropriate. We want to tailor them to their interests. So if your child really enjoys space, then perhaps we focus on books that talk about space. You bring in those nonfiction reads so that they can build up the vocabulary and context from real life, as well as the fiction. So there's going to be those connections being made between the different stories, and they can build up their vocabulary and have those conversations with you to see how they bring it all together. But we don't have to read one story once and then not have that conversation again. So repeated reading is also something that is going to be very valuable as well, especially when we're building up the comprehension. There might be things that they notice based on how many times they read a story, something they didn't notice the first time, it typically might be something they notice the next time. So you're just giving them that opportunity to really dive deeper into our stories and see what they're able to pull out, summarize, and reflect on. The free resource that I would like to share with you today is by Reading Rockets, and they have what are called adventure packs. And these adventure packs can be used at home. They can also be used in the classroom, but they cover different interest areas. They're going to give you a list of a nonfiction book and a fiction book, and it gives you different activities that you can engage in with your child and different activities to help support the development of their reading skills. So these are available for free. You get to download the PDF and it'll walk you through all of these different activities and strategies that you can be using at home or in the classroom if you are an educator listening in. As for a picture book, that I would like to share. It might be surprising that at this point we're on episode 10 and I have yet to share a book by Jory John, which is one of my favorite authors. So for this episode, I am going to pick The Sour Grape. You could pick any of the food group series books. And the reason I'm picking this is because if we want our children to begin to explore specific authors and writing styles, there are so many books in the food group series that you could read them with your child and then have a conversation about what is the story of this one. Is it different than The Bad Seed or The Smart Cookie? What do we notice about the characters? What do we notice about the illustrations in all of the books? But I really like reading the food group series, so I think it's about time that we brought those in for our podcast. And I find that children really enjoy listening to these stories and talking about them. And then also making connections to the characters and what character are they similar to? Why are they similar to that character? Is there someone in their life that reminds them of a certain character? Things like that that allow for them to make more meaning of the stories that you are reading with them. And Jory John also has many other books that he has written. So for example, Cat Problems is another one. So you could talk about different illustrators. Is the story similar to the other stories that he has written that you've read? And just have those conversations to build up their knowledge base that sometimes authors are going to write different ways, different stories, and what does that look like for them? As we wrap up this episode, I think it is important to reflect on the lifelong impact that comprehension skills can have for our children. Not only is it important in the academic world, but also when we talk about lifelong experiences. Comprehension is going to help our children with developing their critical thinking skills, problem solving, and effective communication. By nurturing these skills, we're not just teaching our children how to read. We are going to empower them for lifelong experiences in their learning and understanding. That brings us to the end of the 10th episode of the Lit Mom podcast. I hope that the information that has been shared today is valuable information and that we can see how it ties in nicely with the previous episodes if you've been listening in. I want to say thank you so much for being a part of the Lit team this season and allowing for me to share about literacy, which, as you know by now, is an area that I'm very passionate about. I'm still learning about, so this is a really great opportunity to share what I am learning about, what is evidence-based, what the research is telling us, and how we can put it into practice at home with our own children and in the classroom if we have our educators listening in. Please stay tuned on social media for the opportunity to share your feedback and thinking around what you want to see in future episodes of the Lit Mom podcast. It's always really important to make the learning meaningful. So if there are areas that you're still wondering about, you're looking for more activities linked to phonics or phonemic awareness, fluency, make sure when the time comes you share that with me so I can make sure that I create the podcast to suit the needs of the listeners. As always, I'm Deb, the host of the Lit Mom podcast, where we bring tips and tricks straight to your headphones. Until next time, keep those conversations going, keep tuning in to different podcasts to extend your learning, and as always, keep reading.